I do apologize. So I'm going to have to start that again. Welcome to this session of Dhamma Sukha Wednesday Sutta readings and discussion. And today we're going to start off by just remembering the virtues of the Buddha, and these traditionally are done in Pali. So, Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. So here we're paying homage to the Buddha and the fact that he is a self-enlightened being. And today we're going to look at a sutta from the Aṅguttara Nikāya. It's sutta number 3, or Book of the Threes, and sutta number 68. If you look online to some other sources, it's sometimes quoted as Sutta 69. And this is a sutta about greed, hatred, and delusion. The 3 roots of suffering, or the 3 fires, and what the Buddha would have described as the source of our suffering. And the sutta is called Other Sects, and that references the followers of other teachers. And the monks around the Buddha would often mingle with other groups and hear other teachings, and there'd often be discussions between them. And this seems to be an example of this. So, students, wanderers of other sects may ask you, friends, there are these 3 things. What 3? Greed, hatred, and delusion. These are the 3. What, friends, is the distinction, the disparity, the difference between them? If you are asked this, how should you answer? Bhante, our teachings are rooted in the Blessed One, guided by the Blessed One. Take recourse in the Blessed One. It would be good if the Blessed One would clear up the meaning of this statement. Having heard it from him, the bhikkhus will retain it in mind. Then listen, bhikkhus, students, and attend closely. I will speak. Yes, Bhante, those bhikkhus replied, and the Blessed One said this. Students, if wanderers of other sects should ask you such a question, you should answer them as follows. Lust, friends, is slightly blameworthy, but slow to fade away. Hatred is very blameworthy, but quick to fade away. Delusion is very blameworthy and slow to fade away. So we're all familiar with lust or greed and how it can have that nagging presence all of the time. We can feel that we want something and we can kind of convince ourselves that we don't need it. But that feeling comes back again, and it comes back again and back again. So it's slow to fade away. It's not easily satisfied. When we have a sense of greed and we try to satisfy it, often what we do is feed the greed. Having satisfied it to one degree, it's like a greater desire then is fueled. And this is one of the things that the Buddha said, that if we look for satisfaction for greed outside ourselves, then we're always going to be looking for this aspect of satisfaction, constantly seeking it. Hatred is very blameworthy, but quick to fade away. And we can sometimes recognize that in our own daily lives. We get angry about something, and then we say something or do something, and often it's to get rid of this feeling. So we might say something unfortunate towards somebody else. And it's like we want to get this feeling out and transfer it onto someone else. And then we feel momentarily better. The feeling fades. And then we might have some remorse come up because we've acted in that way. But that initial feeling of hatred is kind of satisfied by that action. And delusion is very blameworthy and slow to fade. Well, delusion is part of our makeup when we don't see clearly. So we have a perception, we perceive the ways the way things are in a particular way, but we don't see them clearly. And the thing about having a belief or a perception about something is that we really take it on board. This is our view. This is the way we perceive things. And so we make it me and mine and my own, and we're very attached to that. And so it's very difficult without the use of meditation, where we directly observe things as they really are. So we can't, if you like, deny that. We can't stay in our belief about something once we've actually seen it clearly. But if we don't meditate, then often our perceptions and our views are very, very long-lived. And so that delusion is very slow to fade away. Suppose they ask, but friends, what is the reason unarisen lust arises and arisen lust increases and expands? You should answer, an attractive object. Now here the word attractive is subha. So it's things that cause delight and interest and attachment and longing. These things, for one who attends carelessly to an attractive object, unarisen lust arises and arisen lust increases and expands. So when we attend carelessly, in the Pali here, the word is yoniso, and it means improperly. So what would be a proper attention? Well, this would be to see things clearly. And clearly that's an aspect that comes through with meditation. But if we don't see clearly, if we don't see the danger in the attachment, and the danger isn't in the object itself, but in the attachment we have to it. When we take it on as me, mine, or my own, when we try to possess it, for instance, we're trying to possess something which inevitably is impermanent. And when we try to make it part of ourselves and have this sense of identity with it, then because it's impermanent, that in itself at some stage is going to generate a sense of suffering. Because the things we want to be permanent. We don't want them to disappear. This, friends, is the reason unarisen lust arises, and arisen lust increases and expands. Suppose they ask, but what, friends, is the reason unarisen hatred arises, and arisen hatred increases and expands? And you should answer. And it says here, a repulsive object, but it's not a repulsive object in the sense of necessarily something disgusting. It's something that repels us. And if we look at the Pali here for this word, it's patika. And one of the things that we can look at in that is things that create anger in us, things that create a sense of collision. And I like the word collision for this because it kind of describes the actual experience that we have. So when we are confronted by something which we have a strong reaction against, it's like there's a collision inside us. There's a shock inside us. And often that shock then generates a feeling of anger. So if we look carefully at the process as part of our meditation, we can see these stages that go through, that we have an unpleasant feeling, and then we have an I don't like it reaction. This is the craving. And this is the shock that we feel. There's a collision internally, as it were. Things are not the way we want them to be, for instance. So when we have this, for one who attends carelessly to an object that has this reaction in us, so we don't see the process clearly. We see that we take an affront to what's happening. And we can see this sometimes when we have a conversation with someone, or we're having an argument, and they say something and we feel completely affronted by it. And it's like we've taken the comment right inside us. And the thing that feels hurt is the fact that perhaps that comment challenges our perception of ourselves. And so we have the comment and our perception coming together, as this collision. And then we feel angry. And there we have the identity occurring on two things. A, that we've identified with the comment coming in as being about me, mine and my own. And then we have this aspect of ourselves that we perceive, which is another aspect of ego, which is identified with a perception of how we are. And when those two come into conflict, we get this reaction. So for one who attends carelessly to an object that gives us this collision inside us, or this anger, unarisen hatred arises, and arisen hatred increases and expands. This, friends, is the reason unarisen hatred arises, and arisen hatred increases and expands. Suppose they ask, but what, friends, is the reason unarisen delusion arises, and arisen delusion increases and expands? You should answer, careless attention. For one who attends carelessly, unarisen delusion arises, and arisen delusion increases and expands. This, friend, is the reason unarisen delusion arises, and arisen delusion increases and expands. So what is this delusion? Well, the delusion is the belief that these things are me, mine and my own, that we don't see the nature of cause and effect. And cause is that because this has arisen, this comes to be. When this ceases, that ceases. So we don't see the conditionality around things, and we don't understand the Four Noble Truths. There's an origin of suffering, but there's also the cessation of suffering, which comes with the cessation of clinging. And clinging is manifested in two different ways. Attachment, which is the first of these. This is the lust or the greed or the desires, or aversion, which is this repulsive or colliding experience that we have. So these are the things that trigger our responses. So we need to have this identity of recognizing, or this capacity to recognize, when these mechanisms are in place. And that is the process of meditation, so that we have the clear-sightedness compared to the delusion. Now, delusion, this is it's in Pali, delusion is moha. And the way you can think of moha is as the opposite of insight. So the insight is not present. And so then we're driven by our desires and our aversions or defenses that we have around experience. Whereas if we can operate from a place of insight, then we tend to see these much more in terms of impersonal processes. And if we can get a handle on that impersonal process, then the power of these lusts and hatred just fizzle out. And that's what the Buddha described. So, suppose they ask you, what, friends, is the reason unarisen lust does not arise, and arisen lust is abandoned? You should answer, an unattractive object. For one who attends carefully to an unattractive object, unarisen lust does not arise, and arisen lust is abandoned. So this is interesting because this is a slightly different aspect of advice. Because the Buddha often describes the antidote for greed as generosity, dana. But here we're being invited to contemplate something that has an unattractive quality rather than an attractive quality. Now, remember, whenever we're working with things like raja, this lust, what we're looking to do is come into balance. And so we don't have to work with extremes here unless we're dealing with an extreme situation. So if we're tempted to eat some chocolate when perhaps our rational mind knows that it's not the right thing or the good thing for us at this time, then we might bring up to mind how it feels when we've eaten too much chocolate and what that feeling feels like. And then that may just balance out, the wanting feeling. But remember, the wanting feeling is very persistent. It comes back very quickly. So we always have to be with ourselves and see that process. And one of the ways that we can do that is not only by bringing up the opposite, and Sister Kima often describes the value about bringing up the opposite as a counterbalance when we're dealing with challenging mental states. But we can also give ourselves a little bit of time. It's good to have a pause before acting on this motivation to, in this case, eat some chocolate. Because often our motivation is seated in something quite different. We might have an uncomfortable feeling that we're trying to get rid of by just eating some chocolate. So if we allow ourselves a short pause, perhaps a couple of minutes, just to see whether the desire for the chocolate is real or whether it's just as a way of getting away from something which is uncomfortable or unpleasant. This in itself begins to develop clear-sightedness. So it's like a practice in miniature. So bringing up the unattractive, and the unattractive is asubha and the attractive is subha. And in some of the texts, the asubha's practices can be quite extreme, but they're for working with when we've got, uncontrolled feelings perhaps of lust in the body or in the mind, and that needs to be deeply challenged by some other perspective. But in daily life, when we're being pulled and pushed by this feeling of raja, this lust or the hatred, lobha, what we need to do is balance these out as best we can by bringing sort of appropriate reflection into the mind. For one who attends, let me get that back there again. For one who attends carefully to an unattractive object, unarisen lust does not arise, and arisen lust is abandoned. This, friends, is the reason unarisen lust does not arise, and arisen lust is abandoned. Suppose they ask, but what, friends, is the reason unarisen hatred does not arise, and arisen hatred is abandoned? You should answer, the liberation of the mind. And the mind here is the translation of the word chitta. It's the heart mind. It's the seat of the emotions. Yeah. By the liberation of the chitta by loving kindness. For one who attends carefully to the liberation of the chitta by loving kindness, unarisen hatred does not arise, and arisen hatred is abandoned. This, friends, is the reason unarisen hatred does not arise, and arisen hatred is abandoned. So here we have something very helpful, because this is central to the TWIM practice. We use loving kindness as our object of attention. And we use the smile to be present throughout the day. And we use the practice, extend the practice out into the day. So this is an active defense, if you like, and protection against feelings of hatred. So whenever perhaps something comes up in our mind, we can simply, if we want, go back into the loving kindness practice, knowing that this is the most effective antidote for the sense of hatred that we feel. And what's very interesting is we may notice a huge resistance to doing this. Why should I send loving kindness to this person? We may be utterly convinced that they're wrong, they're unkind, what the situation is unfair, and all of these things. Well, what I would say here is that when you're dealing with that sort of situation, the perspective is to have is the awareness that for someone who's acting in that way, who feels it's appropriate, they're already lost. They've lost their awareness. And so wishing them loving kindness is wishing them the capacity to see the consequence of their behavior, to see the consequence of what's going on. And then that will have an impact on the way they behave towards others. So although we might feel a huge resistance because of maybe the hurt we feel, sending loving kindness is very helpful. Not only does it bring us back into balance, but it gives the opportunity for the other person to come back into balance. And suppose they ask, but what, friends, is the reason unarisen delusion does not arise, and arisen delusion is abandoned? You should answer, careful attention. For one who attends carefully, arisen delusion does not arise. Unarisen delusion does not arise, and arisen delusion is abandoned. This, friends, is the reason unarisen delusion does not arise, and arisen delusion is abandoned. So, careful attention, clear-sightedness, practices that bring insight. And one of the practices within the TWIM meditation, which is really, really helpful and fundamental to supporting us in this, is the 6 R's. Because the 6 R's are really, really helpful. Because when we have this lust or greed or desire, or when we have this hatred, anger, or sense of defending or protection, what accompanies this is tension. And that is the tension of the I like it, I don't like it mind. And that is what the 6 R's are looking to address. To recognize that we have taken something personally, either through attachment or desire, or through defendedness or aversion or anger. And that tension, that attachment or aversion has tension as part of its manifestation. And so if we can recognize that the mind has gone into an unwholesome state, that we've taken something personally. And remember, Bhante Vimrams's definition of the unwholesome is simply something we have taken personally. It doesn't mean that the thing itself is necessarily bad. There's nothing bad, if you like, about chocolate. The object itself doesn't necessarily have the connotation of good or bad. It's what we've done with the object. So even an angry person who's attacking us, it's not bad. What it is that they're lost. They themselves have lost their awareness at that stage. And so the invitation is for loving kindness and compassion towards them, rather than vengeance or hatred or anger. So when we recognize that we've taken something personally, then we release, and then we relax the tension around our brain. We're moving from a state of delusion to a state of insight. Then we come back, we re-smile, establishing a wholesome basis, and then come back either to our meditation object, which may be the feeling of loving kindness, or to whatever we're doing. But whatever we're doing, we have a softness and expansiveness in the mind, rather than the sense of resistance and blocking. And so this then releases the delusion and reestablishes the insight. So in this very short sutta, there's an interesting juxtaposition between greed, hatred, and delusion. Greed, long-lasting; hatred, short-lasting. Okay, in terms of the experience, if we act on it, but is very blameworthy, if you like, in the sense that it causes a lot of karmic consequence. And then the delusion, if whilst we remain deluded, none of this is going to change. And so that's why delusion is long-lasting. So that's the end of the sutta. And what I'd like to suggest is that we just take about 5 minutes to just sit and practice, and then I can open it up for any questions that might come. So find a position that feels comfortable. And bring to mind a time when you felt joyful and happy. If you're working with the 6 directions, allow that to be the object of your attention. If you're working with your spiritual friend, then start wishing yourself well, staying with the feeling of loving kindness and dropping the image. If you're working with your spiritual friend, just introduce them now if you haven't already done so. Feel the sense of contact with the ground or your chair. Take a deliberate breath in and out. Wiggle your toes, wiggle your fingers, softly open your eyes. Okay. So, any questions around this sutta and the nature of greed and hatred and delusion, which I've heard other teachers describe as greed as being desires, hatred as being our defenses, and delusion being our distractions. So that's another perspective to take on.
Hello, hi.
Hello, yes. Are you able to put your video on? That might be very helpful.
Oh, it is very dark here. I can put it.
Oh, okay, not to worry.
Yeah. Is it the cognitive bias and the delusion are the same thing?
Yeah, just say that again. You've got a little bit of background noise.
Yeah, that's fine. The cognitive bias. Yeah. Cognitive bias and the delusion are the same?
Okay. I can hear you asking about something and delusion. Are they the same? What's the first word, please?
I will type.
Okay. Okay. So are cognitive bias and delusion the same thing? Well, cognitive bias will depend on our perception. And perception is often made up of memory and the capacity to name things. And so if we, for instance, not come across different perspectives on experience, perhaps some of the perspectives that come up through the teaching of the Buddha, then we're going to be skewed in the way that we perceive things. And that skewing is the same in that context as delusion, because we haven't had the opportunity to see clearly from a different perspective. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. How to let go that?
Well, it's cognitive bias is a difficult thing to let go of in the sense that it's conditioned by our experience and the way we perceive. But one of the really useful things about meditation is it takes us away from our rational, logical, and conceptual mind and puts us in our feeling and experiential mind. So we directly experience things for which perhaps we don't have the language to explain, but because we've experienced it directly, we recognize the value of it and the, if you like, the truth of that experience. So for instance, one of the things within the TWIM practice is recognizing that when we release tension, there's a moment when the mind has no desire in it or no aversion in it. And as we practice, we see that moment and begin to recognize there's a quality of mind that doesn't have this playing. Whereas before we meditated, we may have no awareness that there's a quality of mind. So the answer to that is practice. And the more we practice, the more chance we have of developing a mind that is more open and able to see more clearly. And that in itself begins to take out the cognitive bias. But of course, the consequence of this is that some of this bias may be cultural as well, or environmental or social. And so the development of this experience in meditation can cut across all of those different influences and perceptions. So I think the short answer to your question there is continue to practice.
Yeah, okay, got it.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the question. Any other questions? Or any questions around practice as well, and I'll do my best to answer that. Yes, Kiran.
Yeah, I have a question. Maybe I have a little noise on my background too, but it's fine, right?
Background's fine. Yeah.
So I have question like two questions. One is about the hatred. So you said that using the meta object, it's gonna like meta object is antidote for the hatred, ill will, and else, right? But I found that when I have hatred to somebody, like yes, I do take personally. Once I do meditation, I can forget about that. But once I see that person, I think I still need more practice.
Yes. Okay.
So do you have any advice for that?
Yes, in the sense that when you meet the person, try to be sensitive to the sense of tension. Okay, so you meet and then you'll feel this tension. And then try to work directly with the tension rather than trying to feel a sense of loving kindness. If you work with the tension and relax this tension, feel how you can be tense in your body, relax that. This is the fuel that fuels the hatred or fuels the uncomfortable feeling. And then try to work with the metta. Okay, but be sensitive to the tension first. So this is a somatic response in the body. This is a body response to the way you're feeling. And unless we do something about the body response, it's like we haven't taken the battery out of the machine. So it's still going to run. But if we can take the tension out, it's like we take the battery out. And that will then give us an opportunity to have a little bit more space, mental space, physical space in our body, to feel more relaxed, and then work with the loving kindness.
Yeah, but the problem is every time I want to have space for myself, like that person, like everything what they do or they did, like wrong. Like even their voice is like annoying. So
okay, let me come back to you there. Where do you feel the annoyance? What is the sensation of the annoyance?
The tension is here on my neck and shoulders.
Okay, so then come into this and soften and release around it. So soften around the edges of it. When we've got a strong reaction in our body, it's sometimes very difficult to actually get rid of this reaction. But think of the edges of the reaction this is where our attachment or aversion is. So soften the edges. Just like Bhante Ramamsi invites you to soften the tension around the mind. He doesn't ask you to get rid of the thought. He says, soften the tension around the mind. When you have the feeling in the body, soften around the edges of the feeling in the body. Okay?
That makes sense. Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. I'm gonna try.
Okay.
So actually, for me, it's not that I have Dhamma in my life. Like I'm doing practice and I'm gonna test. Am I still have hatred when I see them? Like okay, still have, so I have to practice more. But if not, so my practice is good.
Well, I think we all have to practice more, because what we notice with this is, I like to think of it as like a lake. And as we begin to practice, when we first start to practice, we don't see what the problem is. And then as we begin to practice, you know, the height of the lake comes down, and we see the big boulders sticking out of the lake to start with, you know, and we think, oh, you know, this, that, and the other. And then we practice more and we see lots of small boulders. And then we continue to practice, and then we get down to the gravel and the very small stones. And so we always see that there's more work to do when we're practicing, but we are making progress. Is that okay?
Yeah, that okay, I agree. I also have another question.
Yes.
I'm always wondering about equanimity. Like, yeah, I don't know, like equanimity, like when you do meditation, I don't know, I already reached that or not yet. I think not yet. Like, what kind of feelings of equanimity in daily life?
Well, the challenge with equanimity is, you know, it has a far enemy, which is restlessness, and it has a near enemy, which is indifference. Okay, now the way I think of equanimity and indifference, they can initially feel the same, but indifference has the quality of I don't care. It actually has a pushing away. Whereas equanimity has a quality of I don't mind. And the difference with the I don't mind, it can stay or it can go, whatever it is, I don't mind. That's what equanimity means. Equanimity isn't a place of absolute peace. It's a place where whatever is coming and going does not disturb us. So there can still be the coming and going in our daily life, but we're not reacting in the same way. We don't mind. Yeah.
So I feel that there was a time that I felt equanimity, like I don't mind them, like really don't mind. It doesn't mean I don't care, but there was a time like the ill will or hatred arises, but it's very quick, because after that it's gonna like gone. So my question is, if like, I don't know, is this a level or not? Like metta, compassion, joy, equanimity as the highest one, or we can like up and down like that, or I don't know how.
Well, remember, equanimity is present in all of the jhanas. The equanimity is present in the first jhana. It's just not particularly dominant. There are other things which are dominant, and it gradually becomes more present in each of the jhanas. And then we can think of the fourth jhana as being equanimity, and the fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth being refinements of that equanimity, rather than different states. So equanimity is always present, but just like in our practice, we can move in and out of jhana, we can move up and down out of jhana, in the jhanas. So equanimity can be more dominant in our practice or less. And when we're thinking of going through the Brahma Viharas, we may have a degree of stability around some aspect of our practice, but then the context may change and the conditions may change, and we may find that we go to an earlier stage. Now, the thing about the jhanas and our practice is important not to think of it as something linear. Okay, I much prefer to think of practice like a spiral. Okay, so we're heading in a certain direction, but we're going round the spiral. And at some stage, our practice will seem like this. And then at another stage, our practice will seem like this, whatever those two things are. And what's important is that we should just stay with the practice as it is. rather than feel, I'm at this stage and therefore try and make our experience like this. No, each sitting is a new sitting, and simply stay. And the important thing to recognize with the practice is that in the suttas, it says, you can be in first jhana and go to nibbana. You can be in second jhana and go to nibbana. You don't have to necessarily have gone through all of the stages of the jhanas. Some people will, some people won't. So value your experience in the practice wherever it is. Yeah, because if ultimately you can become into balance around that, that's the mind that's needed to move into these non-conceptual states.
Okay, so I just want to confirm again about the equanimity. So once we experience the equanimity, it doesn't mean forever, right? I mean, like,
No.
yeah, it can be like upside down.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's great. So because I was thinking that people who already experience the equanimity, do they like forever always like flat? It is what it is. And okay, thank you for your explanation. It's really helped me.
There are three. There's this triplet in the Dhammapada: Sabbe Sankhara Anicca, Sabbe Sankhara Dukkha, Sabbe Dhamma Anatta. And Sabbe Sankhara Anicca is all sankharas are anicca. And in the sankharas are the Brahma Viharas. They're part of sankharas. So loving kindness, compassion, mudita, and equanimity are all part of what's collectively called the sankharas. So they're subject to impermanence just in the same way. The only thing that isn't impermanent, if you like, is ultimately nibbana, when that's experienced and at the point of transition at death. So nothing in your meditation experience is ever designated as a permanent thing. And that's why they're non-self. That's, because the self, if we did have a perfect self, it wouldn't be impermanent. Okay, so and that's why the third in that triplet, Sabbe Dhamma Anatta, all dharmas are without self. And all dharma includes all possible experience, including nibbana, does not have a permanent self in it.
I also want to know about your view about nibbana. I mean, like, if we already reach nibbana, is there still have rebirth or not at all?
Rebirth is a consequence of not being an arahant. So for those of us, and I include myself, who are not an arahant, we will be going through rebirth again in some form or another. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
that's really helpful.
If you've gone through the cycle of understanding and growth, which means you're a Sotapan, you have 7 rebirths left. If you go through the cycle again, which is a Sakyagami, you have 1 rebirth left. If you become an Anagami, you're a non-returner, which simply means you don't return to the human realm or below in the animal realms or the hungry ghosts or such like. But you are reborn into another realm. You just are not returning to the human realm. It's only when you're an arahant that you do not have rebirth.
Okay, I guess in previous I have delusion. Now it's clear, crystal clear.
Well, there are always shells of delusion. Delusion is a little bit like an onion. It has lots of different skins to it. So we feel that we've got it all sorted out and we thoroughly understand it, and then we'll begin to peel something else off. Okay. Any other questions around the practice that we've just done, or the sutta that we've been describing? And you can ask any question around practice, and I'll do my best to answer it. No? Okay, so then maybe we just draw this session to a close. And
I think maybe Farzana Irani want to ask.
oh,
Farzana.
yes, please. Prasanna, did you want to ask a question?
No.
Okay, all right. So we'll finish with the closing chant that Bhante Ramsey describes. May suffering ones be suffering free, and the fear-struck fearless be. May the grieving shed all grief, and may all beings find relief. May all beings share this merit that we have thus acquired for the acquisition of all kinds of happiness. May Dīghas and Nagas of mighty power share this merit of ours. May they long protect the Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Hugh.
Goodbye, everyone.
Yeah, bye-bye.